Beneath the seemingly gentle waters of the Caribbean, an old oil pipeline lies buried under a layer of dark silt. For years, it was nothing more than a forgotten piece of industrial infrastructure. Until the day someone decided to bring it back to life, no one realized that inside it, a terrifying secret had been waiting. A secret that would swallow the first men who approached it, vanishing beneath the water in a matter of minutes. Before we continue, a warning. This story is not for those easily shaken by darkness, isolation, or tragedies that unfold in places where escape is nearly impossible. If you still want to know what happened, prepare yourself. Along the deep blue Caribbean coast, where waves tap steadily against the pier, lies a small town called Pointe-à-Pierre. Every morning is like the hundreds before it. A faint smell of oil drifting in the breeze, ship horns echoing from afar, and sunlight slowly staining the sea with gold. Inside a modest house near the shoreline, Buthram, a seasoned diver, 36 years old, quietly sets breakfast on the table. His wife and 3 children are still asleep. He watches them for a brief moment, as if drawing strength for the dangerous day ahead. 4:30 a.m. The town is silent, except for the click of mooring ropes tapping against metal in the wind. Buthram steps outside, takes a deep breath, and begins his morning routine. Running, breath control, steady pacing. To most people, they're simple habits, but to a diver, they're survival. One wrong breath, panic, death beneath 16 meters of cold water. By 5:30 a.m., the sun breaks over the horizon. Buthram pulls on his worn but well-kept diving suit. Inside the chest pocket is a small photograph of his family, a quiet talisman he carries to every job. Today, he and 4 teammates will take on a critical assignment, reactivating an oil pipeline that had been abandoned for 4 years on the seafloor. A task that seemed routine. None of them knew this would be the defining day of their lives. When their small vessel arrived at the offshore worksite, the 5 men stepped onto the deck and formed a familiar circle. They checked everything: harnesses, air tanks, flashlights, wrenches, dive masks. No one spoke much, but everyone understood the precision the job demanded. Amid the tension, Ali, the most light-hearted of the team, couldn't resist cracking a joke. He clapped Buthram on the shoulder and laughed. "Let's finish early. Drinks are on me tonight." A simple line. Everyone chuckled. No one knew it would be the last calm moment they'd ever share with him. Once the vessel was secured, the team began lowering the dry work chamber onto the mouth of the pipeline they were tasked to service. Waves tapped against the metal, causing it to quiver, almost as if warning them about what lay below. Beneath their feet was a massive, pitch-black pipeline, 76 centimeters wide and 360 meters long, like a gaping throat swallowing every trace of light. No one wanted to imagine being trapped inside it. One by one, they climbed into the dry chamber. Compressed oxygen filled the space, giving them a small cavity to work in. Flashlights cut across the water's surface, revealing the shadow below. Right there was the inflatable plug. A large rubber stopper used to block oil and seawater during the years the pipeline had been inactive. Their task today was to release it. Everything was going according to plan. Steady, predictable, until a tiny oversight shifted the fate of the entire team. The wrench needed to open the valve had been left on the boat. A brief, heavy silence. No panic, but everyone understood. This was a mistake that never should have happened. Ali immediately strapped on his air tank and swam back up to retrieve it. His movements were captured by the GoPro strapped to his chest, footage that would later become a chilling record of his final minutes. He returned, handed the wrench over, and work resumed as if nothing had gone wrong. But in coming back at that exact moment, Ali unknowingly stepped straight into a disaster already in motion. The moment the valve was turned, the pressure on both sides of the inflatable plug ruptured out of balance. In an instant, a violent vortex tore through the chamber. Seawater and black oil blasted inward. The chamber flooded. Tools, lights, and all 5 men were sucked downward with brute force. Within seconds, they were dragged into the pipeline beneath the seafloor, a pitch-black tube barely 76 centimeters wide, where neither light nor calm could follow. The current spun them like rag dolls inside a rotating drum. Bodies slammed against steel. Nobody knew which direction they were moving. 90 seconds that felt endless. Finally, the current weakened. Everything went still. Total darkness. Only labored breathing echoing somewhere inside the metal throat, and the realization settled in. This was only the beginning of the nightmare waiting for them beneath the sea. As the men began checking themselves, the true severity of the accident became clear. Inside the pipeline, years of oil residue mixed with seawater, forming a thick, greasy sludge that coated everything like black mud. During those 90 seconds of violent propulsion, each of them had sustained injuries. The pipe was only 30 inches wide. Too narrow to sit, too narrow to kneel, too narrow to even turn sideways. All they could do was lie on their backs, pressed flat against the curved steel floor. The only breathable air floated in a thin layer at the very top of the pipe, just a few centimeters above the waterline. To stay alive, they had to tilt their heads back as far as possible, straining for every shallow breath, while the confined space filled with the stinging, toxic smell of crude oil. 5 men, aged 31 to 57 each, with families waiting for them above the surface. But down here, in the cold darkness, none of them knew if they would ever return. Even though they were only a few meters apart, they couldn't see a thing. All communication came in the form of voices echoing off the curved steel walls. Slowly, they were able to determine their positions. Buthram was closest to the dry chamber. Behind him was Ali, who had taken the worst hit and could no longer move on his own. Farther down were Henry, then Nagasa, and finally Kurban. In the darkness, panic began creeping into their thoughts. Some believed they had to get out immediately, that the air pocket would run out long before help arrived. Others were convinced the company must have realized something went wrong, and that a rescue attempt was already on the way. Crawling through a narrow, oil-slicked, water-filled pipe could be even more deadly than waiting, but these were just assumptions. None of them knew whether anyone above even realized they were missing. After about 20 minutes, things took a turn for the worse. The water level rose slightly, the air thinned quickly, and a single terrifying question emerged. If they had to move, which direction was the way out? They knew the order in which they were lying, but not the orientation. Only one direction led toward berth number 6, where an escape was possible. The other direction led toward berth number 5, a dead end sealed shut. A fatal mistake. Tension rose. Kurban, the oldest among them, began to waver. He believed crawling through the pipe was far too risky. He wanted to stay put, banging on the walls to signal for rescue. But the others disagreed. They knew the air pocket would not sustain them long enough for a slow rescue effort. Eventually, the group settled on the only choice that held even a sliver of hope: follow the direction of Buthram. In the final seconds before the suction pulled them in, each of them had felt the same sensation. Their bodies were dragged forward, feet first. That meant one thing. The last man to be sucked in, Buthram, would be closest to the exit. Those pulled in earlier would have been thrown deeper into the pipe. That chaotic fragment of memory was all they had. So, despite the darkness, despite not being able to see a thing, every man agreed on one conclusion. Moving toward Buthram was the only path that might lead to survival. Heading in the opposite direction, further into the darkness, could only lead to a dead end and death. The group began moving through the darkness, a darkness so thick they couldn't see more than a few centimeters ahead. They inched forward slowly, each man crawling until he felt the feet of the person in front of him. When one of them grew too tired to continue, the entire human chain stopped and waited. A fragile, breathing line of men pulling one another toward a hope that grew thinner with every passing minute. The pipe was 30 inches wide. A grown man's shoulders alone took up nearly 18. There was barely enough room for their backs to scrape against the steel. Every movement of even a few centimeters drained their strength. Ali, second in line, was suffering the most. His legs were broken. Every shift of weight sent waves of pain through his body, leaving him almost unable to move at all. Eventually, he could do nothing but grip Buthram's ankles, while Henry behind him pushed him forward inch by agonizing inch. In the suffocating space, they fought to control their breathing. Each man craned his neck upward to reach the thin layer of air trapped at the top of the pipe. Physical pain, in those moments, was almost secondary to the terror tightening in their minds. Before long, Buthram, the man leading the crawl, realized something was wrong. Ahead of him, the pipe vanished into a completely flooded section. He ordered everyone to stop. The reality was brutal. To continue forward, they would have to dive underwater, without any breathing equipment. No one knew how long the submerged segment was. No one knew if they were even moving in the right direction. They faced two choices, neither promising survival: risk diving through, or stay and wait for rescue. Under these conditions, both options carried a high likelihood of death. Buthram had decades of experience underwater, but nothing had prepared him for this. To give the group any chance at survival, he proposed going ahead first. If he made it through, he would bring rescuers back. Ali, despite his injuries, refused to let him go alone. They had worked side by side for years. He would take the risk with him, even if it cost him everything. The other three agreed. If the two men made it through the flooded stretch, they were to bang on the pipe to signal safety. The two took one enormous breath, then slipped into the submerged darkness. Buthram led the way, Ali clinging to his legs. It didn't take long for the strain to hit. Buthram's lungs began to burn. The air in his chest thinned dangerously. And then, when he was on the verge of passing out, his hand brushed against something hard. In the blackness, he felt along its shape, a tank. A lost air cylinder swept away during the accident. He strapped on the mask, took a desperate breath, then passed it to Ali. The borrowed oxygen gave them a little more time, just enough to push forward again. No one knew how much air the tank held. They simply used what it offered and kept going. When it finally ran empty, Ali began failing again, his breaths shallow, his body trembling from a lack of oxygen. And then, as if fate was taunting them, Buthram found another abandoned tank in the darkness. It bought them more time, more inches of progress. After an unknowable stretch of crawling and swimming, they reached a small pocket of trapped air. They lifted their faces up into it, gasping, trying to replace the oxygen they had nearly lost. But the air pocket was small, far too small to sustain them for long. Once they had caught their breath, they banged on the pipe wall. Moments later, faintly, 3 knocks answered from far behind them. The others were still alive. It was at that moment that Buthram felt the weight of a terrible truth settle over him. He and Ali had made it this far only because they had stumbled across 2 air tanks, a coincidence that bordered on miraculous. The 3 men behind them had no such chance. The flooded distance was too great, and without oxygen they would never reach this air pocket. The thought squeezed at his chest harder than the lack of air ever could. The hopes of the entire group now rested on just 2 men. If they could escape, the others might still be saved. Just as he prepared to move again, Ali suddenly broke down behind him. The darkness, the cold, the exhaustion, the pain, it all crashed down on him at once. He said he couldn't go on anymore. Buthram was terrified too, but he forced his voice to stay calm. He told Ali to slow his breathing, to stay steady. Inside a pipe this tight, panic could make the air feel thinner by the second. Losing control meant losing any chance of survival. The quiet reassurance, small as it was, slowly steadied Ali's breathing. And in that narrow tube beneath the sea, the 2 men prepared to move again. After an unknown amount of time, Buthram understood a harsh truth. If they stayed any longer, both he and Ali would run out of oxygen. He told Ali to remain inside the tiny air pocket, to conserve his strength and wait for rescuers to approach from the outside. Ali agreed. He was so exhausted he could no longer move forward. So Buthram continued alone, carrying the very last cylinder they had found. He crawled forward in the suffocating darkness, dragging himself inch by inch along the oil-slicked steel, forcing his breathing to stay steady as seawater and the choking smell of crude closed in around him. No one knows how long he moved like that. Then, suddenly, he felt the pipe curve. A moment later, it angled straight upward. To an experienced diver, this meant one thing: the exit was close. He shifted his body, pushed upward through the vertical shaft, and then, instinctively, his head burst above the surface. He gasped violently. It was around 5 p.m. More than 2 hours had passed since the accident began. But he wasn't free yet. He was still deep inside the pipe, far below the actual opening. The metal walls were smooth, soaked in oil, and offered nothing to grip. He couldn't climb out on his own. Knowing this might be his only chance, Buthram slammed his fists against the pipe wall, shouting for help with what little strength he had left. Then, a metallic clang answered from above. A heavy chain dropped down into the pipe. 2 co-workers, who had remained topside earlier that morning, had heard him. With their help, Buthram was hooked onto the chain and hauled out of the darkness. He collapsed onto solid ground, shaking, drenched in oil, barely conscious. Within moments, Paria fuel staff, LMCS divers, and the Coast Guard crowded the area. Buthram kept repeating desperately, "The others are alive. You have to go now. Please, go now." But the response shocked him. The coordinators ordered that he be taken to the hospital immediately. Buthram protested, insisting he needed to stay and guide them, but he was too weak to stand. He was lifted onto a stretcher and placed into an ambulance, nearly unconscious. Around 10 p.m. that night, the dive team on site reported hearing clear, rhythmic knocks coming from inside the pipe. Every diver recognized it immediately: survivor signals. Someone inside was still alive, but no one was permitted to enter the pipe. All rescue operations stalled. The entire night passed in paralyzing inaction, a silence heavier than the ocean above them. On Saturday morning, Buthram woke in a hospital bed. His first words were, "Where are the others? Where are they?" His family and co-workers stood around him. No one answered. No one met his eyes. And then the truth was told. Throughout the entire night, no one had entered the pipe. Paria Fuel had not allowed any diver to attempt a rescue, citing safety concerns and unacceptable risk. When Buthram heard this, he broke. News of the accident spread quickly. Local fishermen sailed toward the site, ready to help. But the area was locked down immediately. No vessel was allowed near the pipe. 3 days later, Paria Fuel announced they had recovered 3 bodies using an ROV: Ali, Henry, and Kurban. All 3 were covered in crude oil, their faces swollen beyond recognition. DNA testing was required to confirm identity. Cause of death: drowning inside the pipe. 3 more days passed. The last body, Nagasa, was found deeper inside, caught in a mixture of oil and water. Paria Fuel claimed they had done everything possible, yet months went by, and no official accident report was released. Buthram insisted that if rescue efforts had begun earlier, all 4 men could have been saved. He and the victims' families staged protests, demanding transparency and accountability. Nagasa's wife spoke to the media. "We still have children to raise. We still have to survive. But the person holding our family together is gone forever." Paria Fuel defended themselves, saying the pipe was too narrow for divers carrying tanks, and entering without air cylinders was unreasonably dangerous. They claimed they had to prioritize the safety of the rescue crew. But Buthram, the only surviving witness, said the opposite. He knew where everyone was trapped. He knew their condition. And he knew with certainty that no real rescue attempt had ever been made. A formal commission was eventually assembled. The resulting 380-page report concluded Pariah Fuel failed in its duty to ensure safety, and their decision to block LMCS divers from entering the pipe directly contributed to the tragedy. A total of 12 charges were brought against Pariah Fuel. 3 LMCS executives were also cited. Families filed civil lawsuits demanding compensation. None have been resolved. And worst of all, the exact time of death for each victim remains unknown. Evidence suggests that at least one man may have stayed alive for more than 39 hours inside the pipe. No one knows what they experienced in those final hours, what they hoped for, what they feared, or what they understood about the silence outside. All we know is this: when Buthram was pulled out, all 4 were still alive, and that truth is something he will carry for the rest of his life.